When Thomas Whitmore paid $50 for a girl sold as mute by her violent father, he thought he was buying silent help for his lonely Kansas farm in 1867. But what happens when he discovers that the greatest lie isn't always about what someone can't do but about what they've been forced to hide? It all started when blood dripped from Thomas Whitmore's knuckles as he hammered the bent nail straight. The Kansas sun burned hot against his back this April morning in 1867, and sweat mixed with dirt on his weathered face. He cursed under his breath and sucked the cut on his thumb. 17 years. 17 long years since he'd claimed this patch of prairie earth, and still the old fence fought him like a wild horse. The wooden posts leaned at crazy angles, weathered gray by endless wind and scorching summers. Each board told a story of lonely's repairs done by one man's hands, decisions made without another soul to ask. Thomas wiped his forehead with a torn sleeve and looked across his land. Corn stalks from last year's harvest lay scattered like broken bones. The barn door hung crooked on rusty hinges. His mare, Buttercup, stood in the shade, her ribs showing through dull brown hair. Everything here was tired, old, half-broken. Just like him. At 35, Thomas had grown used to talking to himself. He talked to Buttercup when he fed her oats. He talked to the chickens when he gathered eggs. He even talked to the wooden cross he'd carved for his brother's grave, though Jacob had died fighting rebels in Tennessee and never made it home to Kansas. "Should have married Mary Fletcher when I had the chance," Thomas muttered, driving another nail into the stubborn board. But no, had to wait until after the war, had to be the responsible one. The war had stolen 4 years from his life. When he came back, Mary had married the banker's son and moved to California. The other eligible women in Lawrence had found husbands or moved away. Now, most days, the only female voice Thomas heard belonged to old Mrs. Peterson at the general store, and she mostly complained about the weather. His stomach growled, reminding him that breakfast had been nothing but cold coffee and stale bread. Again, Thomas couldn't cook much beyond beans and bacon, and even that usually ended up burned or under-seasoned. He dreamed sometimes about fresh biscuits, apple pie, the smell of bread rising in a warm kitchen. But dreams didn't fill empty bellies or mend broken fences. A meadowlark called from somewhere in the tall grass, its song sweet and lonely. Thomas paused his hammering to listen. The bird's melody reminded him of his mother's humming when she worked in her garden back in Ohio, before she died of fever, before everything good seemed to slip away like water through his fingers. The sound of wheels on the distant road made him look up. A wagon was coming, moving slowly through the morning heat. Visitors were rare out here. His nearest neighbor lived 3 miles south, and the Henderson family had pulled up stakes last month, heading for Oregon Territory, where they said the land was easier and the rainfall more dependable. Thomas squinted against the bright sky, trying to make out who might be coming his way. The wagon looked rough, pulled by horses that moved like they were bone-tired. Not the kind of rig that carried good news or friendly visits. Something cold settled in his stomach as the wagon grew larger. 2 figures sat on the front seat, ottoman driving, and someone smaller beside him. In the back, Thomas could make out a third person, hunched over and still as death. He set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his pants. Years of war had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every instinct screamed that trouble was heading straight for his front gate. The driver wore a battered hat pulled low over his face. His clothes looked like they'd seen hard, time-spatched pants, a shirt that might have been white once, boots held together with strips of leather. The smaller figure beside him was harder to make out, but Thomas caught a flash of long, dark hair. In the wagon bed, the third person sat perfectly still, too still, like someone who'd learned that moving brought pain. Thomas had seen that kind of stillness before, in prisoners and beaten soldiers. It was the stillness of someone who'd given up hope. The wagon creaked closer, wheels throwing up small clouds of dust. Thomas could hear the driver talking now, though he couldn't make out words. The voice sounded rough, angry, like a man used to getting his way through threats and violence. As they approached his gate, Thomas noticed something else. The smaller figure on the wagon seat definitely. A young woman kept her head down and her hands folded. She never looked at the driver when he spoke. Never responded. Never moved, unless she absolutely had to. The cold feeling in Thomas's stomach grew stronger. He'd seen enough broken people during the war to recognize the signs. This girl was scared. More than scared, she was terrified. And the man beside her was the reason why. The wagon pulled up at Thomas's gate, wheels squeaking to a stop. Dust settled slowly in the still air. The driver pushed back his hat, revealing a face marked by years of drink and violence. Small, mean eyes. A mouth that probably smiled only when someone else was hurting. "You Thomas Whitmore?" the man called out. Thomas nodded, his hand instinctively moving closer to the old army pistol he still wore on his hip. Something about this situation felt dangerous, like standing too close to a rattlesnake. "Name's Garrett Moss," the man said, climbing down from the wagon with movements that spoke of old injuries and constant pain. "Heard you might be looking for help around this place." Thomas glanced at the young woman still sitting frozen on the wagon seat, then at the still figure in the back. His mouth went dry as he began to understand what kind of help this man was offering, and why every decent bone in his body was telling him to reach for his gun. "What exactly are you selling, Moss?" Thomas's voice came out harder than he intended. Garrett Moss spat tobacco juice into the dirt and grinned, showing teeth stained brown from years of chewing. "Smart man. Gets right to the point." He jerked his thumb toward the wagon. "Got myself a girl here who needs a new situation. Figured a lonely farmer like yourself might appreciate some company." The young woman in the wagon bed finally lifted her head, and Thomas felt his breath catch. She couldn't be more than 16, with dark hair that hung like a curtain around a face that should have been pretty. Instead, ugly purple bruises bloomed along her jawline, and her left eye was swollen nearly shut. But her other eye, green as spring grass, looked directly at Thomas with an expression that hit him like a punch to the chest. It wasn't pleading or desperate. It was resigned, like someone who'd stopped believing rescue was possible. "This is Elena," Moss said, as if he was introducing a horse for sale. "She don't talk much. Actually, she don't talk at all. Mute as a stone, but she works harder than any woman I ever seen. Cooks, cleans, mends, tends animals. Whatever you need doing, she'll do it without complaint." Thomas noticed how Elena flinched when Moss raised his voice, how she seemed to make herself smaller whenever he gestured in her direction. Every movement spoke of someone who'd learned to expect violence. "How do you know she's mute?" Thomas asked. Moss laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. "'Cause I never heard her say a word in 16 years of raising her. Not one peep, not even when she was little and got hurt. Just makes these little sounds sometimes, like a wounded animal." Elena's good eye flashed with something anger, maybe, or hurt so deep it had turned to rage. But she stayed perfectly still, hands folded in her lap like she was praying. "Course, that makes her perfect for a man who values peace and quiet," Moss continued. "No nagging, no arguing, no female nonsense. Just good hard work and silence. Rare thing in a woman, if you ask me." Thomas felt sick. "You're her father?" "Raised her from a baby after her mama died. Fed her, clothed her, kept her alive when plenty would have thrown her out for being defective." Moss's voice turned defensive. "But I got debts now. Bad debts. And she's old enough to earn her keep somewhere else." "You mean sell her?" "I mean find her a good situation with a man who'll appreciate what she's got to offer." Moss stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, Whitmore, I heard about you. War hero, good farmer, respectable man. But you've been alone out here too long. Man needs a woman around even if she can't chatter your ear off." Thomas looked at Elena again. She was watching him now, and he could see intelligence in that green eye. Sharp intelligence, and something elsey, flicker of hope so small it was almost invisible. What makes you think I'm interested? Thomas asked. Moss grinned wider. Because you ain't told me to get off your land yet, and because I can see it in your face. You're tired of being alone, tired of cooking your own meals and mending your own clothes. This girl can fix all that. For a price. Course, for a price. Nothing good in this world comes free. Moss named his figure. $50, and she's yours to keep. Legal and proper. $50. Thomas had exactly $63 hidden in his coffee tin, his savings, for new equipment. Seed money for next year's crop. Almost everything he had in the world. That's a lot of money, Thomas said. For what you're getting, it's a bargain. Moss leaned against the wagon wheel. Tell you what, let me sweeten the deal. Girl comes with her own clothes, such as they are. Plus, she's got this little bundle of things her mama left her. Sentimental value, you understand. Elena's hands tightened protectively around a small cloth bundle Thomas hadn't noticed before. Whatever was in there meant something to her, maybe the only things in the world that did. And if I say no? Moss's expression darkened. Well, that'd be unfortunate. See, I got another interested party in Dodge City. Saloon owner who's got different ideas about how to put a silent girl to work. He's willing to pay $75, but I thought I'd give a respectable man first chance. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Thomas understood perfectly what kind of work a saloon owner would want from a young woman who couldn't scream for help. Elena's eye went wide with terror, and Thomas saw her shrink even smaller in the wagon bed. She knew exactly what Moss was threatening. But Dodge City's a long ride. Moss continued conversationally. Lot of things can happen on the road. Bandits, Indians, accidents. Dangerous country for a man traveling alone with valuable cargo. More threats, Thomas realized. Moss was telling him that Elena might not even survive the trip to Dodge City if Thomas refused to buy her. Thomas looked at Elena one more time. She was staring at him now with naked desperation, no longer trying to hide her feelings. In her face, he saw every scared soldier he'd tried to save during the war. Every innocent person caught in the crossfire of other people's cruelty. He thought about his empty cabin, his silent meals, his lonely nights talking to ghosts and memories. He thought about the $63 in his coffee tin, and what it meant to give up almost everything for a stranger. Then he thought about what it meant to walk away and leave this girl to face whatever hell Moss had planned for her. $30? Thomas heard himself say. Moss's eyes gleamed. 50, or I load her back up and head for Dodge. 35, that's all I can spare. 50. Moss's hand moved to rest on the knife at his belt. And that's final. You want her, or not? Thomas looked into Elena's eye one last time and saw something that made his decision for him. She wasn't just resigned anymore. She was looking at him like he might be her only chance at survival. Like he might be the only person in the world who could save her. $50? Thomas said quietly. But I want her belongings too. Everything she owns. Deal. Moss stuck out his hand. Let's shake on it. As Thomas counted out the money that represented almost everything he had, he wondered what in God's name he was getting himself into, and whether he'd just saved someone's life or made the biggest mistake of his own. The crack of a whip split the morning air as Garrett's boot hit the ground hard. Elena flinched at the sound, her small body pressing against the wooden wagon boards like she wanted to disappear completely. Thomas watched her reaction and felt his hands curl into fists without thinking. $50 takes her off my hands forever, Garrett announced, loud enough for anyone within a mile to hear. He pulled a dirty piece of paper from his coat pocket and waved it in the air. Got it all written down, legal-like. She belongs to whoever pays. Thomas studied the paper but couldn't make out the words from where he stood. Something about the way Garrett held it told him the man couldn't read it either. What's her name? Thomas asked, keeping his voice steady even though his heart was beating fast. Elena Moss. She's 16, strong as a mule, and quiet as the grave. Garrett spat brown tobacco juice that landed near Thomas's boots. Perfect for a man who wants peace in his house. Elena's eyes darted between the two men, like a cornered rabbit watching hunters. Her dark hair hung in tangled strings around her face, but Thomas could see intelligence shining through the fear. This wasn't just any scared girl. This was someone who had learned to survive by staying invisible. "She looks hurt," Thomas said, nodding toward the purple mark on Elena's jaw. Garrett shrugged. "Girls that age get clumsy, always walking into doors and such." His laugh had no warmth in it. "Besides, a man's got a right to keep his family in line." The way he said family made Thomas's stomach turn. He had seen enough violence during the war to recognize the signs. Elena wasn't clumsy. Someone had hit her, and recently. "I need to think about this," Thomas said, though his mind was already made up. "Think fast," Garrett replied. "I got 3 more stops today, and each one's got men with cash money. Fellow in Dodge City said he'd pay 60 for the right girl." He winked. "Of course, he's got different plans for her than farming." Elena's face went white as fresh snow. Her hands gripped her small bundle so tight her knuckles looked like they might break through her skin. Thomas realized she understood exactly what Garrett meant about Dodge City. $30, Thomas said quickly. 50, or I load her back up and head east. Garrett's hand moved to rest on the knife handle sticking out of his belt. "I ain't in the mood for bargaining." Thomas looked at Elena again. She was staring at him now, not at the ground. Her green eyes held a question he couldn't quite read, but he thought he saw hope flickering there, like a candle flame in the wind. 40? Thomas tried again. 50. Garrett's voice got harder. "Final offer. Take it or watch me drive away." Elena made a sound then, so soft, Thomas almost missed it. Not quite a word, not quite a cry, but something that cut through him like a cold blade. She was begging without making a sound, pleading with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. Thomas reached into his pocket and counted out the money. $50 was most of what he had saved from selling his wheat crop. It should have bought seeds for next year, maybe a new plow blade, definitely winter supplies. Instead, it was going to buy a human being, which felt wrong in every way that mattered. But leaving Elena with Garrett felt worse. "Deal," Thomas said, handing over the bills. Garrett counted each one twice before stuffing them into his pocket. "She's your problem now," he said, climbing back onto his wagon seat. "And mister, don't expect her to be grateful. Girls like her don't know how to appreciate kindness." Elena climbed down from the wagon bed slowly, like her legs weren't sure they would hold her. She clutched her bundle against her chest and took 3 careful steps toward Thomas before stopping. The distance between them felt huge, like a canyon neither of them knew how to cross. Garrett snapped his reins and the wagon lurched forward. "Good luck, Whitmore," he called over his shoulder. "You're gonna need it." As the dust cloud from Garrett's wagon grew smaller, Thomas and Elena stood facing each other in the morning sunshine. He had just bought her freedom, but he could see in her eyes that she didn't feel free. She felt owned by someone new, and that broke something inside his chest. "Helena," he said gently, "you're safe now." She nodded, but her body stayed tense like she was ready to run. Thomas realized that for Elena, safety was still just a word that other people used. She would have to learn what it felt like, one careful day at a time. But first, she would have to learn to trust the stranger who had just paid $50 to call her his. Elena moved through Thomas's cabin like she was walking on broken glass, each step planned and careful. 3 days had passed since Garrett's wagon disappeared into the prairie, and she still jumped every time a door creaked or a floorboard groaned under Thomas's boots. She had claimed the small storage room behind the kitchen as her own space, spreading her few belongings on the narrow cot Thomas had set up for her. A faded blue dress, a pair of worn shoes, a cracked hand mirror, and the mysterious bundle she guarded like treasure. Thomas had glimpsed something wooden inside the cloth, but Elena kept it wrapped tight and close to her body whenever she moved. On this particular morning, Thomas watched her work from his seat at the kitchen table. She swept the floor in perfectly straight lines, never missing a corner, never making unnecessary noise. Her movements reminded him of a soldier following orders, efficient and precise but empty of joy. "Elena," he said, making his voice as gentle as possible, "you don't have to clean the whole house every day." She stopped sweeping and looked at him with confusion written across her face. Slowly, she pointed to herself, then to the broom, then around the room. The message was clear. This was what she was for. Thomas shook his head. "You're not here to be my servant. You're here to be safe." Elena tilted her head like she was trying to understand words in a foreign language. Safe was still a new idea to her, something she couldn't quite believe in yet. That afternoon, Thomas found her sitting by the window, staring out at the endless Kansas sky. She had finished all the housework hours ago and now seemed lost, like she didn't know what to do when no one was giving her orders. "Do you like birds?" Thomas asked, settling into the chair beside her. Elena nodded, then pointed to a red cardinal perched on the fence post outside. She made a small gesture with her hands, like she was trying to show him something, but then stopped and dropped her hands to her lap. "What were you trying to tell me?" Thomas asked. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then slowly reached for her bundle. Her fingers worked at the knots in the cloth, and Thomas held his breath, sensing this was important. Finally, she unwrapped a small wooden bird, carved with incredible detail. Every feather was perfect, every curve smooth and lifelike. "You made this?" Thomas whispered. Elena nodded, then quickly started to wrap it back up, like she had made a mistake showing him. "Wait," Thomas said. "It's beautiful, really beautiful." Elena paused, the bird still in her hands. Thomas could see her trying to decide whether to trust him with this piece of herself. "My grandfather was a woodcarver," Thomas continued. "He tried to teach me once, but I was too impatient. My birds always looked like lumpy potatoes." For the first time since arriving, Elena smiled. It was small and quick, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, but it transformed her whole face. She looked like the young woman she was supposed to be, instead of the frightened child she had been forced to become. She unwrapped the bird completely and held it out to Thomas. He took it carefully, turning it over in his hands. The craftsmanship was incredible. This wasn't the work of someone playing around with a knife and some wood. This was art. "How long have you been carving?" Thomas asked. Elena held up both hands, flashing her fingers twice. 10 years. She had been carving since she was 6 years old. "Who taught you?" Elena's smile faded. She pointed to herself, then made a motion like she was hiding something. She had taught herself, and she had kept it secret. Thomas understood why. Garrett had probably seen no value in Elena's talent, maybe even seen it as a waste of time that took away from her work. But this little wooden bird proved that Elena was more than just a girl to be bought and sold. She was an artist, someone who could create beauty in a world that had shown her mostly ugliness. "Would you teach me?" Thomas asked. "I promised to be a better student than I was for my grandfather." Elena looked surprised, then pleased. She nodded eagerly and began making gestures with her hands, showing him how to hold an imaginary knife, how to work with the grain of the wood, how to shape the curves of a wing. For the first time since she had arrived, Elena seemed to forget to be afraid. Her hands moved with confidence as she demonstrated carving techniques, and her eyes lit up with the passion of someone sharing something they truly loved. Thomas realized this was the real Elena, the person who had been hiding underneath all that fear and silence. She wasn't just a victim or a burden or a problem to be solved. She was a talented young woman with dreams and skills and a spirit that hadn't been completely broken by the cruelty she had faced. As evening painted the sky purple and gold, they sat together at the kitchen table while Elena showed Thomas how to hold a carving knife properly. She had found her voice through her hands and her art, and Thomas was beginning to understand that maybe he had gotten something much more valuable than a farm helper. He had found a friend. The crash of splintering wood echoed across the morning air as Thomas's plow blade snapped clean in half against a hidden boulder. He stood there, hands still gripping the useless handles, watching 2 weeks of spring planting disappear like smoke in the wind. Of all the rotten luck, he muttered, kicking at the broken metal. The nearest blacksmith was a full day's ride to town, and every day lost meant crops planted too late to beat the summer heat. Elena appeared at his shoulder, moving so quietly he hadn't heard her approach. She studied the broken plow with the same careful attention she gave everything else, then pointed toward the barn and made quick motions with her hands. "You think you can help fix this?" Thomas asked, surprised. She nodded and hurried toward the barn, her skirts swishing through the tall grass. Thomas followed, curious about what she had in mind. Inside the dim building, Elena moved with purpose, gathering tools from corners where Thomas had forgotten they existed. She held up a hammer, tested its weight, then pointed to the forge in the corner. "You know metalwork?" Thomas asked. Elena's face lit up with something close to excitement. She pointed to herself, then mimicked the motions of heating metal and hammering it into shape. Her movements were confident, practiced. "Well, I'll be," Thomas said softly. "Your father never mentioned you had skills like that." At the mention of her father, Elena's expression darkened. She shook her head firmly and pointed toward the door, as if pushing away bad memories. Then she gathered kindling and began building a fire in the forge. As the flames grew, Thomas found himself watching Elena work with growing amazement. She knew exactly how hot to make the fire, how to position the metal, when to strike and when to wait. Her small hands held the heavy hammer with surprising strength, each blow precise and purposeful. "Where did you learn this?" he asked during a break. Elena paused, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool morning. She pointed to herself, then made the motion of someone much smaller. She had learned as a child. From who? This time, Elena's face softened. She touched her heart, then pointed skyward. Someone she loved who was gone now. "Your mother?" Elena nodded, and for a moment Thomas saw past the careful walls she kept around herself. He saw a little girl standing on tiptoes to reach a forge, learning skills her father would later call useless for a daughter. The work continued through the morning, with Elena teaching Thomas techniques he had never seen before. She showed him how to read the color of heated metal, how to shape it without forcing it, how to make something broken stronger than it had been before. When they finally attached the repaired blade to the plow, Thomas tested it against the same boulder that had caused the break. The metal held firm, better than new. "Elena," Thomas said, setting down his tools, "this is remarkable work. You have a real gift." She ducked her head, but he caught the small smile that crossed her face. It was the first time he had seen her look proud of anything about herself. That evening, as they sat down for supper, Thomas made a decision that surprised them both. Instead of sitting at opposite ends of the kitchen like they had been doing, he pulled up a chair beside Elena at the small table. "Seems wrong to eat alone when there's good company right here," he said. Elena looked uncertain, glancing toward the door as if checking for escape routes. "You don't have to be afraid," Thomas said gently. "Not here, not with me." Slowly, Elena relaxed. She reached into her small bundle of belongings and pulled out something wrapped in faded cloth. Inside was a wooden bird, carved with incredible detail. Every feather seemed real, every curve of wing and beak perfect. She held it out to Thomas with both hands, a gift offered with nervous hope. Thomas accepted the carving with the reverence it deserved. "Elena, this is beautiful. Did you make this?" She nodded, then made quick gestures, showing how she had carved it, piece by piece, during long evenings when her father wasn't watching. "You have so many talents," Thomas said, turning the bird over in his hands. "Metalwork, carving, probably a dozen other things I don't know about yet." Elena's eyes widened. No one had ever called her skills talents before. "Would you teach me?" Thomas asked. "I've always wondered how to bring life from wood like this." The smile that bloomed across Elena's face was like watching the sunrise. For the first time since her arrival, she looked truly happy. She nodded eagerly, then jumped up and gathered scraps of wood from beside the fireplace. As Elena began showing Thomas the basics of carving, he realized something important was happening between them. This wasn't just about fixing plows or making wooden birds. This was about two lonely people discovering they didn't have to be lonely anymore. Outside, the Kansas wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the scent of growing things and the promise of rain. Inside the small cabin, Elena and Thomas worked side by side, teacher and student, friend and friend. For the first time in years, the silence in Thomas's home felt comfortable instead of empty. And for the first time in her life, Elena felt valued for who she truly was, not just for the work her hands could do. But neither of them knew that their peaceful evening was about to be shattered by a storm that would change everything. Thunder rumbled in the distance like a sleeping giant turning over in his bed. Elena froze at the kitchen window, her hands tight around the wooden spoon she had been using to stir soup. Dark clouds rolled across the prairie like spilled ink, swallowing the afternoon sun. Thomas looked up from the leather harness he was mending and saw Elena's face go pale. "Just a spring storm," he said gently. "Nothing to worry about." But Elena was worried. She pointed toward the approaching darkness, then touched her throat and shook her head frantically. Thomas didn't understand what she was trying to tell him, but her fear was real and growing stronger with each rumble of thunder. The wind picked up suddenly, rattling the cabin windows and sending papers flying around the room. Elena dropped the spoon and pressed both hands over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. "Elena, what's wrong?" Thomas stood and moved toward her, but she backed away, shaking her head. Outside, the storm hit like a freight train. Hail began pelting the roof with sounds like gunshots, and the wind howled around the cabin walls. Elena sank to the floor in the corner, making herself as small as possible. Thomas had seen this kind of fear before, during the war. Soldiers who jumped at every loud noise, who couldn't stand being trapped in small spaces. But Elena was afraid of storms, not battles. What had happened to make her this frightened? A massive crack of lightning split the sky, so close that the thunder came instantly. The cabin shook, and Elena let out a small cry of terror. Then she clapped both hands over her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Thomas stood perfectly still. That cry had been a human sound, a voice sound, not the gesture language Elena had been using, but an actual voice. "Elena," he said softly, "was that you?" She shook her head frantically, but tears were streaming down her face. The secret was out, hanging in the air between them like lightning waiting to strike. "It's okay," Thomas said, moving slowly toward her. "Whatever you're afraid of, you don't have to be afraid of it here." Elena looked up at him, and Thomas saw years of terror in her eyes. Not just fear of storms, but fear of being discovered, fear of punishment, fear of being hurt for something as simple as making a sound. Another crash of thunder shook the cabin, and this time, Elena couldn't stop herself. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible over the storm. "Please don't tell." Thomas felt his heart break and mend at the same time. Elena could speak. She had always been able to speak. The silence had been forced on her, chosen out of fear rather than inability. He sat down on the floor across from her, far enough away that she wouldn't feel trapped. "Elena, I would never hurt you for having a voice. Never." She stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. But Father said, "Your father was wrong." Thomas kept his voice gentle but firm. "Your voice belongs to you, not to him, not to anyone else." Elena wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking slightly. He said, "Good daughters should be seen and not heard, that men don't want wives who talk back." "Some men don't," Thomas admitted, "but those aren't the kind of men worth knowing." The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, something else was happening. Elena was finding courage she didn't know she had. "I used to sing," she whispered, so quietly Thomas had to lean forward to hear. "Before Mother died, I used to sing all the time." "What happened when your mother died?" Elena's voice grew stronger, as if talking about her mother gave her strength. Father changed. Mother used to protect me, used to tell him that smart daughters were a blessing. After she was gone, he said my talking back was the reason God took her away. Thomas felt anger building in his chest, hot and righteous. No child should be taught that their voice was a curse. Elena, look at me, he said. Your mother's death wasn't your fault, and your voice isn't something to be ashamed of. She met his eyes, and Thomas saw hope flickering there like a candle flame in the wind. What if I say the wrong thing? She asked. Then we'll figure it out together, Thomas said. That's what people do when they care about each other. The word care hung in the air between them, full of meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Outside, the storm was beginning to move on, thunder growing distant and hail softening to regular rain, but inside the cabin, Elena was just beginning to find her voice again. I wanted to thank you, she said, her words coming easier now, for the kindness, for treating me like a person. You are a person, Thomas said firmly. You're not property, you're not a burden, you're not a problem to be solved. You're Elena, and you matter. Elena looked at him with wonder, as if he had just told her she could fly. Can I tell you something? She asked. Anything. I dream about teaching children to read. I know it's foolish, but I dream about having a real school someday. Thomas smiled. That doesn't sound foolish at all. That sounds like a fine dream. For the first time since the storm began, Elena smiled back, and when she spoke again, her voice was clear and strong and absolutely beautiful. Then maybe, she said, just maybe, dreams can come true after all. Neither of them knew that outside in the fading storm, other dreams were being born too. Dreams that would soon bring danger to their door, and test whether the bond growing between them was strong enough to survive what was coming. Please, don't send me away. Elena's whispered words cut through the storm's noise like a knife through fabric. Thomas stopped moving. His coffee cup sat halfway to his mouth. The girl who had lived in his house for weeks without making a sound had just spoken 3 clear words. Real words. Not the grunts and sighs he had heard before. Thunder crashed overhead again. Elena pressed herself against the kitchen wall. Her hands covered her mouth like she had done something terrible. Her green eyes were wide with fear. Elena? Thomas set down his cup very slowly. Did you just talk to me? She shook her head fast. Too fast. But her eyes told a different story. They held secrets that wanted to come out. It's okay, Thomas said. His voice was gentle like when he talked to scared animals. You're safe here. Whatever you're hiding, you don't have to hide it from me. Elena's chest moved up and down quickly. She was breathing like she had been running. Lightning lit up the small cabin again. In that bright white moment, Thomas saw tears on her face. I can talk, she whispered. The words came out rough and scratchy. I always could. Thomas felt like the floor had moved under his feet. Then why? Because talking got me hurt. Elena touched her throat with shaking fingers. Father said daughters should be quiet. He said men don't want wives who argue. The anger that filled Thomas was hot and sudden. It burned in his chest like a fire. Someone had hurt this girl for using her voice. Someone had made her afraid of her own words. How long? He asked. Since I was 10. Elena's voice got a little stronger. That's when Mother died. Father changed after that, got mean, started drinking more. She walked to the window. Rain pounded against the glass. The first time he hit me for talking back, I thought it was because I was sad about Mother. But then it happened again, and again. Thomas wanted to ask more questions, but he could see that each word cost Elena something, like she was paying with pieces of herself. I learned to stay quiet, she continued. Learned to nod and point and make faces instead of talking. It kept me safe, mostly. What about when he sold you to me? Elena turned from the window. Her face was pale but determined. I thought if I could stay silent long enough, maybe you'd let me stay. Maybe you wouldn't send me away like he always threatened to do. Elena. Thomas stood up slowly. I would never send you away for having a voice. Your words belong to you, not to him, not to anyone else. She stared at him like he had said something impossible. But what if I say wrong things? What if I make you angry? Then we'll figure it out together. Thomas took a step closer. But you hiding who you really are? That's not protecting either of us. That's just letting your father win even when he's not here. Elena's shoulders started to shake, not from cold, but from something bigger, like a dam breaking inside her chest. I wanted to tell you, she said. The words came faster now. Every day I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to ask about your books. I wanted to tell you that your cooking is actually pretty good. Thomas almost smiled at that. You think my cooking is good? Better than mine, Elena said. A tiny smile touched her lips. I burned beans 3 times before I figured out your stove. I wondered about that smell. They looked at each other across the small kitchen. The storm outside was getting worse, but inside something was getting better, like a door had opened between them. There's more, Elena said. Her voice was stronger now, more sure. Things I haven't told you about who I was before, about what I want to be now. I'm listening. Elena sat down at the kitchen table. She folded her hands in front of her like she was praying. I can read, Thomas. Really read. Not just simple words. I can read books. Your mother taught you? Every day until she died. She said reading was freedom. Said no one could take away what you learned. Elena's eyes got bright. I've been reading your books at night. The ones on the shelf by your bed. Thomas felt surprised and pleased at the same time. Which ones? The poetry book. The one about farming. The Bible. Elena looked down at her hands. And the one about teaching children to read. Something clicked in Thomas's mind. You want to be a teacher. I wanted to be one. Before. Elena's voice got sad. Mother said I was smart enough. Said I could help other children learn like she helped me. What's stopping you now? Elena looked up at him with confusion. Everything. I'm not the kind of person who becomes a teacher, Thomas. I'm the kind who gets sold. Says who? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the storm was starting to move away. The thunder was getting quieter. But inside the cabin, something big was just beginning. I never thought about it that way, Elena said slowly. Maybe it's time to start. Elena was quiet for a long moment. She was thinking hard about something. Thomas could see it in her face. If I could be anything, she said finally, I think I'd want to teach girls who are like I was. Girls who think they don't matter. Girls who've been told to stay quiet. That sounds like important work. But how could someone like me ever do something like that? Thomas leaned forward. Elena, you just spent 10 minutes talking after staying silent for weeks. If you can do that, you can do anything. For the first time since he'd known her, Elena really smiled. Not a tiny one or a scared one. A real smile that lit up her whole face. I have so much to tell you, she said. We have time, Thomas replied. All the time in the world. But even as he said it, something in the back of his mind whispered that time might be exactly what they didn't have. Elena's laughter filled the morning air like birdsong as she chased Thomas's escaped chickens around the yard. Come back here, you silly bird, she called out, her voice bright and free. 3 days had passed since the storm, and each day Elena talked more. It was like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. Thomas leaned against the fence post, watching her. The scared, silent girl was gone. In her place was someone full of life and ideas and dreams. Someone who asked questions about everything from why corn grew in rows to how far away the stars were. Got you. Elena caught the last chicken and held it gently. This one thinks she's smarter than us. Maybe she is, Thomas said. Chickens are pretty clever. Elena carried the bird to the coop. Did you know chickens can learn their names? I read it in one of your books. Which book was that? The one about animals on farms. It had pictures, too. Elena secured the coop door. I've been thinking about what you said. About teaching. They walked toward the house together. The morning sun was warm on their faces. Everything felt peaceful and right. What kind of thinking? Well, Elena said, picking up a bucket for the morning milk, what if there are other girls out there like I was? Girls who can read but nobody knows it. Or girls who want to learn but can't go to school. Thomas nodded. He'd been thinking about the same thing. There probably are. I could teach them. Maybe start small. Just a few girls at first. Elena's eyes were bright with excitement. We could use the barn when it's empty. Or even just meet under the big oak tree. You'd need books, paper, pencils. I'd figure it out. Elena's voice was full of determination. Women help each other around here, right? Maybe some of them would help me help their daughters. Thomas smiled. Elena's dreams were getting bigger every day. It made him happy and worried at the same time. Happy because she deserved to dream. Worried because the world didn't always let women like Elena follow their dreams. There's something else, Elena said as they reached the barn. Something I've been wanting to ask you. What's that? Elena stopped walking. She turned to face him with a serious expression. Why did you really buy me from my father? The question caught Thomas off guard. What do you mean? You could have hired help from town, could have found a wife through the church, but you paid money for a girl you thought couldn't even talk. Elena studied his face. Why? Thomas was quiet while he thought. It was a good question, one he'd been asking himself. I saw something in your eyes, he said finally. Something that reminded me of myself after the war, like you were trapped somewhere inside yourself. And you wanted to help? I wanted. Thomas paused. I wanted to give you the choice I never had, the choice to start over somewhere safe. Elena's eyes got soft. What choice didn't you have? Thomas had never told anyone this story, but something about Elena's honest face made him want to try. I had a brother, younger than me. When the war started, he wanted to sign up too. I told him to stay home, told him someone had to take care of the farm. But he went anyway? He went anyway. Got killed at Gettysburg. Thomas's voice got rough. I always wondered if I could have saved him. If I'd let him come with me, maybe I could have protected him. Elena was quiet for a moment. So when you saw me, you thought maybe you could protect someone this time. Something like that. Thomas, Elena's voice was gentle. You did save someone. You saved me. They looked at each other across the morning, quiet. Thomas felt something warm in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. I think you saved me too, he said. Elena smiled. We make a good team. The best. They were almost to the barn when Elena stopped suddenly. Her head turned toward the road like a deer hearing a hunter. Do you hear that? She asked. Thomas listened. In the distance, he could hear something that made his stomach drop. Horse hooves, multiple horses, moving fast. Get inside, he said quickly. What's wrong? Just get inside now. But it was too late. 5 riders appeared over the hill, moving toward the farm like they owned it. Even from a distance, Thomas could see who was leading them. Garrett Moss. Elena's father had come back. Oh no, Elena whispered. Her face went white. He found me. The riders were getting closer. Thomas could see guns on their hips, could see the hard look on their faces. These weren't men coming for a friendly visit. Elena, listen to me, Thomas said urgently. Whatever happens, don't let them make you stop talking. Promise me. Thomas, I'm scared. I know. But you're not the same person he sold to me. You're stronger now. Remember that. The horses were almost to the yard. Elena grabbed Thomas's arm. What if he takes me away? Thomas looked into her frightened eyes. Then I'll come get you, no matter what it takes. You promise? I promise. The riders pulled up in front of the house. Garrett Moss climbed down from his horse like he owned the place. But he wasn't alone this time. The men with him wore badges, real badges. Well, well, Garrett said with a nasty smile. Look what we got here. My little girl, playing house. Elena stepped behind Thomas, but she didn't run. That was something, at least. You got no business here, Moss, Thomas said. Oh, but I do. Garrett pulled out a piece of paper. Got myself a legal document here. Says I got the right to take back what's mine. One of the badge-wearing men rode forward. Thomas Whitmore? I'm Marshall Crawford. We need to talk. Thomas felt Elena's hand on his back. She was shaking, but she was still there, still standing with him. About what? About the girl you stole. The word stole hit Thomas like a slap. I didn't steal anybody. I paid fair and square. Turns out, Crawford said with a cold smile, she was already promised to someone else. Someone with more money and more influence than a dirt farmer. Elena made a small sound behind him, fear mixed with anger. Who? Thomas asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Silas Blackwood of Abilene. Rich man, important man, man who doesn't like it when people interfere with his business arrangements. Thomas felt the world shifting under his feet. This wasn't just about Garrett wanting his daughter back. This was about money and power and people who thought they could buy whatever they wanted. I never agreed to marry anyone, Elena said suddenly. Her voice was shaky but clear. The men turned to stare at her. Garrett's mouth fell open. I'll be damned, he breathed. She ain't mute after all. Crawford's eyes got narrow and dangerous. Doesn't matter what she agreed to, girl. Your daddy made a deal. You're going to honor it. No, Elena said, stepping out from behind Thomas. I'm not. The simple word hung in the morning air like a challenge. Thomas felt proud and terrified at the same time. We'll see about that, Crawford said. Thomas Whitmore, you're under arrest. As the marshal pulled out a pair of iron handcuffs, Thomas realized that their peaceful morning had just become the beginning of the biggest fight of their lives. The sound of horses running fast made Elena drop her basket of beans. 5 riders came over the hill like dark clouds before a storm. Thomas felt his heart pound as he saw who led them. Garrett Moss sat tall on his horse. His mean smile showed yellow teeth. Behind him rode 2 men with guns on their hips and angry faces. But the 4th man scared Thomas most. He wore a black suit and sat straight like a soldier. His cold blue eyes looked at everything like he owned it. Well, well, Garrett called out as he jumped down from his horse. Look what we got here. My little mute girl playing house. Elena stepped behind Thomas. Her hands shook, but she stood firm. Thomas could feel her fear, but also something new, anger. You got your money, Moss, Thomas said. His voice stayed calm, but his hand moved closer to his gun. Our business is done. Garrett laughed. It sounded like rocks falling down a well. That's where you're wrong, farmer boy. Turns out I didn't have the right to sell her. Someone else owns her now. The man in black got off his horse, slow and careful. When he spoke, his voice cut through the air like a knife. Marshall James Crawford. I carry papers from the territorial judge. This girl belongs to Mr. Silas Blackwood, of Abilene by legal contract. Thomas felt the world tilt. Legal papers meant courts and lawyers and money he didn't have. But Elena's small hand touched his arm, giving him strength. What kind of contract? Thomas asked. Marriage contract, Crawford said. He pulled out a folded paper from his coat, signed and sealed. Mr. Blackwood paid good money for a wife. He wants what he bought. Elena made a small sound behind Thomas. Not fear this time, but rage. I never signed anything, she said. Her voice rang clear across the yard. All 5 men stopped moving. Garrett's mouth fell open like a fish gasping for air. His face turned red, then white. She talks? He whispered. Always could, Elena said, stepping beside Thomas. You just never wanted to hear what I had to say. Crawford's eyes got narrow and mean. Doesn't matter if you can talk or not, girl. Your father signed for you. That makes it legal. Thomas looked at the papers Crawford held. They looked real enough. Official seals and fancy writing that meant trouble. But something about this felt wrong. I'm sorry to interrupt you right here, but if you're enjoying this story thus far, please consider to subscribe to our channel so that you can enjoy so many more in the future. And by the way, don't hesitate to like the video as well. and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Now enjoy the rest of the story. Let me see those papers, Thomas said. Don't need to show you nothing, farmer. We're taking the girl and riding out. But Thomas had fought in the war. He knew when men were lying. Crawford's hand kept moving to his gun. Garrett wouldn't meet his eyes. The other two men looked ready to run. Elena, Thomas said without turning around, do you want to go with these men? No. Her voice got stronger with each word. This is my home now. These men want to sell me like a cow or a horse. I won't go. Garrett spat in the dirt. Don't matter what you want, girl. You're property. Just like a horse or cow, like you said. Thomas felt something change inside him, like a door slamming shut and another one opening. He had bought Elena to save her. Now he would fight to keep her safe. She's not property, Thomas said. He took a step forward. Something in the way he moved made the mounted men shift in their saddles. Not anymore. Any man who wants to take her goes through me first. Crawford's hand dropped to his gun handle. You threatening a federal marshal, farmer? I'm protecting what's mine. Thomas's voice stayed quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who had seen too much death to fear it now. Elena chose to stay. That's enough for me. The silence stretched like a rope about to break. Thomas could hear Elena breathing behind him. He could smell the sweat on the horses and see the doubt creeping into the men's eyes. One of Garrett's friends whispered something that sounded like, not worth it. But Crawford's face stayed hard as stone. Mr. Blackwood has friends in high places, Crawford said. Judges, politicians, railroad men. You can't fight that kind of power with just a gun and good intentions. Maybe not, Thomas said. But I can try. Elena stepped up beside him, her chin lifted high and proud. We can try together. Crawford looked at them both for a long moment. Then he folded the papers and put them back in his coat. This isn't over, he said. Mr. Blackwood doesn't give up easy. He'll come for what belongs to him. She doesn't belong to anyone but herself, Thomas said. As the 5 men got back on their horses, Garrett turned back one more time, his face twisted with hate. You think you won something here, farmer? Wait till you see what real power can do. That girl will be in Abilene before the month is out, and you'll be in jail for stealing. The horses kicked up dust as they rode away. Thomas watched until they disappeared over the hill. But he knew this fight was just beginning. Elena stood beside him, her face pale but determined. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to bring trouble to your door. Thomas looked down at her. In the late afternoon sun, she looked older somehow. Not just a scared girl anymore, but a woman ready to fight for her freedom. Trouble was already here, he said. We just gave it a name. Act X. Thomas couldn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his old army gun by lamplight. The metal felt cold and familiar in his hands. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like ghost fingers. Elena sat across from him, mending a torn shirt. Her needle moved quick and sure, but Thomas saw how her hands trembled just a little. Every few minutes, she looked toward the door. They'll be back, she said quietly. I know. Thomas checked the gun's action one more time. Click, click, smooth as silk. Question is when and how many. Elena set down her sewing. In the yellow lamplight, her face looked older than her 16 years. Thomas, I need to tell you something about Silas Blackwood. Thomas looked up from his gun. Something in her voice made his stomach tight. I've heard his name before. When Father took me to town, men would whisper about him. They said he owned half the railroad between here and Kansas City. They said he collected things, rare things, pretty things. Elena's voice got smaller, things that couldn't say no. The lamp flickered, making shadows dance on the walls. Thomas felt cold creep up his spine. What kind of things? Young women mostly. Girls whose families owed him money. He would make deals, take the daughter, forgive the debt. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. They say he keeps them in a big house in Abilene, like dolls in a pretty cage. Thomas set his gun down hard on the table. The sound made Elena jump. How many girls? Nobody knows for sure. Some say 5. Some say 10. They never come back to tell their stories. Outside, an owl called from the barn. The sound made them both look toward the door. In the silence that followed, Thomas heard Elena's quick breathing. We need help, Thomas said. Can't fight this alone. Who would help us? Blackwood has money and power. We have nothing. Thomas stood up and walked to the window. The prairie stretched out black and endless under the stars. Somewhere out there, men were planning to take Elena away. But this was his land, his home. He had fought too hard for it to give up now. We have something Blackwood doesn't, Thomas said. What's that? We're right. Thomas turned back to face her. And this is Kansas. People here know the difference between right and wrong. Elena looked puzzled. I don't understand. Thomas sat back down and leaned forward. Elena, do you know why Kansas became a state? She shook her head. Because people here fought a war to prove that no human being could be owned by another. They called it Bleeding Kansas because good men died for that principle. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. Your situation isn't so different. Blackwood thinks he can own you because he has a piece of paper. But papers don't make slavery legal just because they're signed by the right people. Elena's eyes widened. You think people will see it that way? I think some will. The ones who matter. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. Tomorrow, I'm riding to town. Going to talk to the minister, the school teacher, anyone who believes in justice. If Blackwood wants a fight, we'll give him one. But even as he said the words, Thomas felt doubt creeping in. Blackwood had money for lawyers and judges. What did they have except hope and the righteousness of their cause? As if reading his thoughts, Elena spoke up. What if we lose? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the gaps in the cabin walls. The lamp flame danced, casting shifting shadows across their faces. Then at least we'll go down fighting, he said finally. Sometimes that's all a person can do. Stand up and fight, even when the odds are bad. Elena nodded slowly. My mother used to say something like that. She said courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared to death. Smart woman, your mother. She was. Elena picked up her sewing again, but her movements were steadier now. Thomas, thank you. For what? For seeing me as a person worth fighting for. Nobody ever did that before. Thomas felt something warm spread through his chest. Not just affection, but respect. Elena wasn't just a girl he had saved anymore. She was a partner, someone willing to stand beside him against whatever came next. We'll get through this, he said, together. Elena smiled, and for the first time since the riders had appeared, it reached her eyes. Together, she agreed. Outside, the Kansas wind carried the scent of rain and distant thunder. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but inside the little cabin, two people prepared to face whatever darkness lay ahead. They had found something worth fighting for. Not just Elena's freedom, but the principle that every person had the right to choose their own path. And sometimes, Thomas thought, that was enough to move mountains. Or at least enough to face down one very powerful, very angry railroad man. The telegraph boy's horse was still breathing hard when Thomas read the yellow paper that would change everything. Legal proceedings initiated. Stop surrender. Girl or face federal charges. Stop Blackwood. Elena watched Thomas's face turn white as fresh snow, and she knew their peaceful days were over. What does it mean? Elena asked, though her stomach already knew the answer. Thomas crumpled the message in his fist. It means Blackwood isn't giving up. He's bringing the law into this. He looked at Elena with eyes full of worry and something else, determination that burned like a forge fire. But we're not backing down either. The next morning, Thomas hitched up the wagon before sunrise. We're going to town, he told Elena. If Blackwood wants a fight, we need allies. Elena climbed up beside him, her heart beating fast like a rabbit's. She had never fought anyone before, especially not a rich man with power. Their first stop was the church. Reverend Matthews was feeding his chickens when they arrived. He was a thin man with kind eyes who had come west to help people find hope. "Thomas, Elena," he said, wiping his hands on his pants. "You both look troubled." Thomas explained about Blackwood and the telegram. The Reverend listened carefully, his face growing serious. "This man thinks he can buy and sell people like their horses," Reverend Matthews said. "That's not God's way." He promised to speak to his congregation about helping them. At the schoolhouse, Miss Jenny Patterson was cleaning chalkboards. She was only 22, one of the few unmarried women in town who worked for herself. Elena felt nervous talking to her, because Miss Patterson was everything Elena wanted to be: educated, independent, respected. "A marriage contract without the woman's consent?" Miss Patterson's voice rose with anger. "That's barbaric." "Of course I'll help." She explained that she knew other teachers in Lawrence and Topeka who might support them. "Women need to stand together," she said, looking directly at Elena. "Your voice matters." Their biggest surprise came at the general store. Mr. Henderson, who usually minded his own business, pulled Thomas aside. "I heard about your trouble," he said quietly. "My sister went through something similar back in Missouri. Forced marriage nearly killed her spirit." He pressed a $20 bill into Thomas's hand. "For legal fees." Word spread quickly through the small farming community. That evening, neighbors Thomas barely knew came to his cabin. The Johnsons brought fresh bread and a promise to testify about Elena's character. Old Pete Muller, who fought in the war with Thomas, sat on the porch whittling while they talked strategy. "We didn't fight to keep some folks free, just so other folks could be sold," he said. Elena listened to all these people planning to help her, and something strange happened inside her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. These people weren't helping her because they had to. They wanted to because they thought she was worth fighting for. But not everyone supported them. Mrs. Pemberton from the bank made sure Elena heard her talking to other ladies at church. "That girl should know her place," she whispered loudly. "Respectable women don't cause such trouble." Elena felt her cheeks burn with shame, but Thomas squeezed her hand. "Don't listen to her," he said later as they walked home. "She's scared of what you represent, a woman who chooses her own path." The hardest part was waiting. Elena practiced reading aloud every night, preparing for the day she might have to speak for herself in court. Her voice grew stronger each evening, but so did her fears. What if the judge didn't believe her? What if Blackwood's lawyers made her look like a liar? Thomas taught her about legal words she might hear. "Contract means agreement," he explained. "But a real agreement needs both people to say yes." Elena wrote new words in her journal, building weapons out of vocabulary. 3 days before the trial, Elena made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She asked Thomas to take her to see other women in town, not the wealthy ones who looked down on her, but the ones who worked hard and understood struggle. They visited Mary O'Connell, who took in washing to support her 4 children after her husband died in a mining accident. They talked to Rosa Valdez, who cleaned houses while her husband worked the railroad. These women listened to Elena's story with understanding eyes. "You're brave," Mary told her. "Braver than I was when my husband's family tried to take my children away." "Speaking up is scary," Rosa agreed. "But staying quiet when you're being hurt, that's scarier." Each conversation made Elena stronger. She realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman who had been told to be quiet, to accept whatever men decided for them. The night before they had to leave for Lawrence in the trial, Elena sat with Thomas on the porch. The stars were bright overhead, and somewhere in the darkness, a nightbird was singing. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. Thomas nodded, but she could see worry in his eyes. "What if we lose?" Elena took his hand in both of hers. "Then at least we'll lose fighting for what's right." "That's more than I ever had before I came here." She paused, listening to the night sounds around their little farm. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you gave me something no one can take away." "What's that?" "The knowledge that I'm worth fighting for." As they prepared for bed, Both knew that tomorrow would decide not just Elena's future, but what kind of world they wanted to live in, known, where people could be bought and sold, or one where everyone had the right to choose their own destiny. Act 12. The courthouse in Lawrence buzzed with more excitement than a county fair, but this crowd had come to see justice, not prizes. Elena's hands shook as she climbed the stone steps, hundreds of eyes watching her every move. "Remember," Thomas whispered, "you belong here just as much as anyone else." Inside, the courtroom was packed tighter than sardines in a can. Elena had never seen so many people in one place: farmers in their best clothes, town ladies with fancy hats, lawyers in dark suits, and reporters with notebooks ready to write down every word. Judge Harrison sat behind his tall desk like a king on a throne, his white beard making him look older than the hills. Elena found herself staring at Silas Blackwood for the first time. He was a big man with gold buttons on his vest and rings on his fingers. His cold blue eyes looked at her like she was a horse he was thinking about buying. When their eyes met, he smiled. But it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who always got what he wanted. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison," called the bailiff. Everyone stood up, and Elena felt her knees wobble. This was really happening. In a few minutes, strangers would decide if she was free or if she belonged to a man she had never chosen. Blackwood's lawyer was a sharp-faced man from Kansas City who talked like he had marbles in his mouth. "Your Honor," he began, "the facts are simple. Miss Elena Moss was legally promised in marriage to my client through a binding contract with her legal guardian, Garrett Moss. Mr. Whitmore has unlawfully interfered with this arrangement." Elena watched the judge's face, trying to read his thoughts. He looked serious and stern, like a man who believed in following rules no matter what. Her heart sank a little. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, "Mr. Blackwood has already spent considerable money preparing for this marriage, a house, furnishings, even a wedding dress. He has been damaged by this interference and deserves compensation." Elena felt sick. The lawyer was talking about her like she was a business deal gone wrong, not a person with feelings and dreams. When it was time for Thomas's lawyer, a young man from town, who usually handled land disputes, to speak, Elena could see sweat on his forehead. "Your Honor," he said, his voice not as smooth as the other lawyers, "we live in America. The Constitution says all people are equal. You can't force someone into marriage against their will. Marriage contracts are legal arrangements," Judge Harrison said. "They're not the same as slavery." Elena felt her chance slipping away. Then something inside her caught fire, the same feeling she had when she first spoke to Thomas during the storm. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly on the wooden floor. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the packed room. Every head turned toward her, and she felt the weight of all those stares. "May I speak for myself?" Judge Harrison's eyebrows shot up like two caterpillars jumping. "Young lady, you are not a party to these proceedings." "But I am the subject of them." Elena stepped into the aisle, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "If this court is deciding my fate, don't I have the right to be heard?" Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Some people nodded, others frowned. Elena could hear Mrs. Pemberton making disapproving noises behind her. Judge Harrison studied Elena for what felt like forever. She stood straight, meeting his eyes, refusing to look away. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Very well. Approach the bench." Elena walked forward on legs that felt like water. Each step took her closer to either freedom or a life she didn't want. Behind her, she could feel Thomas's support like warmth from a fire. "Your Honor," she began, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, "I was never told about any marriage contract. Nobody asked if I wanted to marry Mr. Blackwood. I was sold by a man who hurt me for speaking my mind." She turned to face the crowd, looking at faces both kind and cruel. "I am not a cow to be traded. I am not a chair to be sold. I am a person with a mind and a heart and the right to choose my own life. Blackwood's lawyer jumped up like a jack-in-the-box. Objection. The girl's feelings don't matter when there's a legal contract. Don't they? Elena asked, turning back to the judge. Your Honor, if a woman can be forced to marry someone she doesn't love, how is that different from slavery? If I have no say in my own life, what freedom do any of us really have? The courtroom exploded with voices, some agreeing, others arguing, everyone talking at once. Judge Harrison banged his wooden hammer for quiet, but Elena could see something changing in his expression. I can read and write, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. I can teach children. I can help people learn. I can be more than just someone's unwilling wife. She looked directly at Thomas, seeing pride and love in his eyes. Thomas Whitmore didn't steal property. He saved a person who was drowning. An old woman in the front row started clapping. Then another person joined her. Then another. Soon half the courtroom was applauding while the other half looked angry or confused. And, Elena said, her voice now ringing clear as a church bell, I choose to stay with Thomas not because he owns me, but because he sees me as I truly am, equal to him, equal to anyone in this room. In the stunned silence that followed, Elena realized she had found something more valuable than gold, her own voice, speaking her own truth. Whatever Judge Harrison decided, she had already won the most important battle of all. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse slammed shut behind Elena as angry shouts filled the air. Hang the farmer! Someone yelled from the crowd. Give Blackwood his bride! Screamed another. Elena's hands shook as she walked down the center aisle, but her chin stayed high. Every eye in the packed room watched her move toward the front, where Thomas sat in chains. Judge Harrison banged his wooden hammer on the desk over and over. Order! Order in this court! The noise slowly died down, but Elena could feel the hate from some people burning into her back like fire. Young lady, the judge said in his deep voice, you were not supposed to speak today. This case is about legal papers, not feelings. Elena stopped walking and turned to face the whole room. Her heart beat so fast she thought it might burst. Your Honor, with respect, how can you decide my future without hearing my words? A gasp went through the crowd. Women weren't supposed to talk back to judges. Elena saw some people lean forward, wanting to hear more. Others crossed their arms and frowned. I have something important to say, Elena continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. Something that might change everything you think you know about this case. From the back of the room, Garrett Moss stood up. Don't listen to her lies. She's just a girl who doesn't know her place. Elena's eyes found her father in the crowd, the man who had hit her so many times for speaking, the man who had sold her like a farm animal. For a moment, her courage almost broke. But then she saw Thomas watching her, his face full of pride and hope. My father says I don't know my place, Elena said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. He's right. My place is not where he put me. My place is not where Mr. Blackwood wants me. My place is where I choose to be. The judge looked surprised. Young woman, do you understand what you're saying? You're going against a legal contract. I understand more than you might think, Elena replied. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small book. I can read every word in this book. I taught myself using my mother's old Bible. I know what the law says about contracts. Blackwood's fancy lawyer jumped up from his chair. This is ridiculous. The girl's education has nothing to do with... Sit down, Judge Harrison ordered. He looked at Elena with new interest. Continue, miss. Elena opened the book and began to read out loud. Her voice was clear and strong. All persons born in the United States are citizens of the United States. No state shall deny to any person within its territory the equal protection of the laws. The courthouse went completely quiet. Even the people who had been angry before seemed shocked. That's from the new law they passed after the war. Elena explained, the 14th Amendment. It says all persons have equal protection. Not all men, all persons. That includes me. She walked closer to the judge's desk. Your Honor, I was never asked if I wanted to marry Mr. Blackwood. I was never told about any contract. My father made a deal about my life without telling me. How is that equal protection under the law? The rich lawyer stood up again, his face red with anger. The father has the legal right to make such contracts for his daughter. Does he? Elena asked, turning to face the man. Even when the daughter is old enough to make her own choices? Even when the contract was made in secret? Even when it goes against her will completely? She looked around the room, making eye contact with different people. Some nodded, others still looked angry, but they were all listening. I want to tell you all something else, Elena said, her voice growing even stronger. Mr. Blackwood has 3 other wives already. Did you know that? He collects women like some men collect horses. He keeps them locked in his big house and never lets them go to town alone. Gasps and whispers filled the room. This was news to most people. Blackwood's lawyer turned pale. That's a lie. Is it? Elena pulled out a letter from her pocket. This is from one of his wives. She managed to get it to me through a kitchen worker. Should I read what she says about her life in that house? The judge held up his hand. That won't be necessary right now, but I will examine that letter later. He looked at Elena with growing respect. Miss, you said you can read and write. Where did you learn such skills? My mother taught me in secret, Elena answered. She said education was the key to freedom. She was right. Learning to read taught me about my rights. Learning to write taught me how to express my thoughts. Learning to think taught me that I don't have to accept what others choose for me. From his seat, Thomas felt his heart swell with pride. This was not the scared, silent girl he had brought home months ago. This was a strong woman fighting for her own life. I have one more thing to say, Elena announced, walking to the center of the room. Mr. Blackwood claims he owns me because of a paper my father signed. But I ask you this. If a man can sell his daughter like cattle, what stops him from selling his son? If a woman has no say in her marriage, what stops men from losing their rights next? The room erupted in arguments. Men shouted at each other. Women whispered frantically. The judge banged his hammer again and again. Elena raised her voice above the noise. I choose Thomas Whitmore. Not because he bought me, but because he freed me. Not because he owns me, but because he respects me. Not because I have to, but because I want to. In that moment, standing in the middle of the chaos she had created, Elena realized something amazing. She was no longer afraid. Her voice was her power, and no one could take it away from her ever again. But would the judge agree? Would the law protect her choice? The answer would change not just her life, but the lives of women everywhere. The gavel came down like thunder, and Judge Harrison's words rang through the courthouse like church bells. This court finds no legal contract existed. Thomas Whitmore, you are free to go. Elena felt her knees almost give out as cheers exploded around her. But in the back of the room, she saw Blackwood's face twist with rage, and she knew this victory might come with a terrible price. Thomas's chains fell to the floor with a loud clang. He rushed to Elena and wrapped her in his arms as people pressed around them, shouting congratulations and shaking their hands. But through the crowd, Elena caught sight of Blackwood pushing toward the door, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. This isn't over, Blackwood snarled as he passed Elena. I have friends in high places. You'll regret embarrassing me. Elena lifted her chin and looked him straight in the eye. I regret nothing, sir. And neither should any woman who chooses her own path. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air felt crisp and clean. Elena breathed deeply, filling her lungs with freedom. But as they walked to their wagon, she noticed a small group of women following them. They looked nervous but determined. Miss Elena? A young woman with work-worn hands stepped forward. My name is Mary. I heard what you said in there about reading and writing. Is it true you taught yourself? Yes, Elena replied, curious where this was going. Would you teach others? Mary's voice was barely a whisper. There's a lot of us who never learned. We always wanted to. But Elena's heart began to race with excitement. Here was a chance to use her voice for something bigger than herself. Of course. Where could we meet? An older woman joined the group. I'm Mrs. Patterson. I have a big kitchen that could fit maybe 8 or 10 women. Would that work? Within minutes, Elena had arranged to start teaching the very next week. As the women scattered to spread the word, Elena turned to Thomas with shining eyes. Did you hear that? They want to learn. I can really help them. Thomas smiled, but Elena could see worry in his eyes. Elena, are you sure about this? Blackwood meant what he said, teaching women to read. Some men around here won't like that idea. Some men didn't like the idea of me having a choice either, Elena replied firmly. But that didn't stop us from fighting for it. The next week, 8 women gathered in Mrs. Patterson's kitchen for Elena's first reading lesson. They ranged in age from 16 to 60, but they all had the same hungry look in their eyes. Elena started with simple letters, showing them how to write their own names. Look, cried Sarah, a farmer's wife with 5 children. That's really my name? S-A-R-A-H? It's beautiful, Elena assured her. Your name is the most important word you'll ever learn to write. But their peaceful lesson was interrupted by loud voices outside. Through the window, Elena saw a group of men on horseback. Her blood turned cold when she recognized Garrett Moss among them. Ladies, stay calm, Elena whispered. Keep working on your letters. The men dismounted and stomped up to the door. Mrs. Patterson opened it before they could knock. What do you men want? She demanded, hands on her hips. We want this foolishness to stop, Garrett declared. Women learning to read is against nature. It fills their heads with dangerous ideas. Elena stood up slowly, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Mr. Moss, these women have every right to education. Not my women, they don't, shouted a man Elena recognized as Sarah's husband. Sarah, get home this instant. But Sarah surprised everyone, including herself. No, Billy, I'm learning to write my children's names. I want to read them stories from books. I forbid it. You can't forbid me to better myself, Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger. Elena taught me that we all have the right to learn. Elena felt a surge of pride. Her students were already finding their own voices. The confrontation might have turned violent, but suddenly another group arrived, women from town, including the minister's wife and the doctor's sister. They had come to support Elena's school. Gentlemen, said Mrs. Cooper, the minister's wife, surely you don't object to women learning to read the Bible better? The men found themselves outnumbered and outargued. They left, but Elena knew they would be back. Over the following months, Elena's school grew. Women came from farms and towns across the county. They learned to read newspapers, write letters to distant family, and understand legal documents. Most importantly, they learned they had choices. Elena also started a second class for children whose mothers couldn't afford regular school. She taught them using books donated by sympathetic townspeople and boards painted black for writing practice. One evening, as Elena walked home from teaching, she found Thomas waiting by the garden gate with a letter in his hand. What's that? She asked. A job offer, Thomas said, his voice strange. For you, from the Territorial School Board in Topeka. They want you to train other women to become teachers. Elena's mouth fell open. Really? They want me? They heard about your school, about how you stood up in court, about how you're changing lives. Thomas paused. Elena, this is what you always dreamed of. A real teaching position with real pay. Elena took the letter with trembling hands. As she read it, tears filled her eyes. They wanted her to start immediately. They would provide housing and a good salary. She would be training women from across Kansas to become teachers themselves. Thomas, she whispered, this means I'd have to leave the farm. Leave you. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. Elena, when I bought you from your father, I thought I was saving you. But you saved yourself. You saved me too. And now you can save hundreds of other women. But what about us? What about our life here? Thomas reached out and took her hands. Our life will be whatever we choose to make it. If you want this job, I'll find a way to make it work. Maybe I can sell the farm and come with you. Maybe I can learn to do something besides farming." Elena looked into his eyes and saw the same love that had protected her, supported her, and helped her find her voice. But now she also saw something else: respect for her dreams and her choices. "You would really leave your farm for me?" "Helena, you're not my property. You're my partner. Partners support each other's dreams." 6 months later, Elena stood in front of her first class of future teachers in Topeka. 30 women from across Kansas had come to learn from her. As she looked at their eager faces, she thought about the scared, silent girl who had arrived at Thomas's farm just 2 years before. "Good morning, ladies," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Today we begin learning how to teach others. But first, let me tell you something important. Your voice matters. Your thoughts matter. You matter. And every student you teach needs to know that about themselves, too." From the back of the room, Thomas watched his wife with pride. He had found work in town and a small house near the school. Their life was different now, but it was exactly what they had both chosen. As Elena began her lesson, her voice carried the same power that had won her freedom in that courthouse. But now that power was multiplied by 30, as each woman she taught would go on to teach others. The silent girl was gone forever. In her place stood a woman whose voice would echo through generations of students, teaching them all the same simple truth: everyone deserves the right to choose their own story.